Welcome back to another episode of the Deep Cover Podcast. This week, we want to talk a little bit about the NBA playoffs. The playoffs have started. We're deep through the first round. A couple series have already been decided, and a couple series are still underway. But by the time this launches, a few of those series might have been completely wrapped up. But there's a few things I want to discuss about this first round, and just some observations that I've seen throughout. So let's start in the East. Start with Boston and Miami. So going into this series, I really thought it'd be a sweep, right? I really thought that Boston would just impose their will on Miami. Miami, Mr. Terry Rozier and Jimmy Butler, just extremely shorthanded. But, it's turned into kind of a little bit of a weird series. At this time of recording, the Celtics are up 2-1. I think they finished the series in 5 or 6. But when you look at the Celtics in the grander scheme of things, they are a team that this year they feel like their time is now, their window is now. It's why they brought in Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday. And I think anything less than a championship, or at least a championship appearance, and to comport yourself well in that championship, is an unmitigated disaster. The teams have just been put together here. This team has been put together to win now, to maximize on the prime of Tatum and Brown. They've extended Holiday to maximize that. If they don't make it, if they lose in the second round to the winner of Cleveland or Orlando, which I don't think will happen, or even if they lose in the conference finals to anybody of the other teams, I think that you could see some heads roll, and I think the head that would roll would be Joe Mazzulla. They would bring in another coach who has a little bit more championship pedigree and experience and try and maximize this core then. But for me, Boston is the clear-cut favorite in the East. They should be in the finals, and if they're not, it's a massive, massive disappointment. Next, let's go to Orlando, Cleveland. It's a little of a less interesting series to me, to be quite honest. Cleveland feels like they really just want to win a series to really show that this rebuild and this Donovan Mitchell era is legitimate. Orlando, obviously a young team, and still hasn't really figured out how to win in the playoffs fully. The series is now tied at 2-2, and I'm not really sure who's going to win this series. I liked Orlando in 7 to start. Their first 2 games were a disaster. Conversely, Cleveland's past 2 games have also been a disaster, so it feels like it's going that way. I think if Cleveland loses this series, we could probably say goodbye to Donovan Mitchell. My guess is that he would probably end up becoming a net or potentially a member of the Heat. So we'll see how that shakes out. Next up, we got the Knicks and the Sixers in the 2-7 matchup. Been the most entertaining series of the first round, I think. And I'm not just saying that as a Knicks fan. It's been physical. It's been back and forth. Games have been close. As I'm recording this, Game 4 is underway. But it's been a lot of headlines, a lot of talk about refereeing, a lot of talk about injury, just a lot of different elements there. But my takeaway here is, let's say the Sixers lose this series. How can we really, in good conscience, really elevate Joel Embiid as a top great center of all time? And I know it sounds crazy because of how prolific he is, but he is right now the only MVP, former MVP, that has never made a conference final. Even guys like Bob McAdoo and Wes Unseld, who didn't make it in their primes, made it later on as role players. And when you're talking about the center position, it's the most talent-rich position in NBA history. Jokic today, of course, and you go to the past, you had David Robinson, Tim Duncan, Patrick Ewing, Hakeem Olajuwon, Shaq, Wilt, Russell, Abdul-Jabbar. All these guys won multiple titles or at least got to the finals. Moses Malone is another one. And if you can't get to a conference final, that's a big stain, regardless of all the numbers, right? And I just can't. It's hard to see Embiid holding up. There's been a lot of injuries, but also we got to hold the guy accountable, right? He's had players. He's had James Harden. He's had Ben Simmons when he was a great player. He's had Jimmy Butler. He now has an elevating Tyrese Maxey. So not being able to get it done, there's going to be a lot of questions around him. Now, if he is able to get it done, and if you think about the path, if they could get past the Knicks, they're waiting for Bucks, Pacers. Pacers look like they might win that series right now. They're still young, and I think Embiid could get past the Pacers. So then he gets to the conference final, and maybe some of those criticisms go away. But as it stands today, I don't think we're in a position where it is going to happen. And that's really upsetting as somebody who watches the game and wants to appreciate its great players. But ultimately, you're measured on team success, whether that's right or wrong. Let's go into Bucks Pacers. So this is a weird series. The Bucks are just a weird team. The experiments haven't worked. Dame Lillard's going to miss Game 4. Giannis might not play the entire series. Chris Middleton's up and down, and this young Pacers team is taking advantage. If the Bucks lose this series, it's a catastrophic failure. There's no way around it. It's just really bad, right? And I just wonder what happens. Do we start hearing Giannis trade rumors if they lose this series? Do they try to get rid of Middleton because of the injuries? There's a lot that you could see. And, it's not a great time right now in Milwaukee. Conversely, the Pacers, you feel great, right? You're up 2-1. You're the underdog. You have all the control. Even if you lose this series, no bad. You lost to a champion, right? So I think the Bucks have a lot more to lose in this series. Let's go out west. Start with Oklahoma City and New Orleans. Again, not a lot to talk about here. New Orleans is a better team. Sorry, Oklahoma City is the better team. New Orleans is missing Zion Williamson, and the series should be over in no more than 5 games. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren have all been fantastic. I think there is some worry about keeping them together long term, but that's tomorrow's problem, not today's problem. We go to the 4-5. It's Clippers Mavs. Another interesting series because I think both of these teams have so much on the line. The Mavs have to really legitimize these moves they made in the middle of the season, legitimize the Kyrie Irving and Luka era, and it looks like they're on their way to doing that. The Clippers, on the other hand, brought in James Harden, and is it another early exit? You gotta say this Kawhi and PG era has been nothing short of a disappointment, right? They haven't gotten to the finals, they haven't won a title, and it looks like with Kawhi struggling with injuries again, they're on that path again. And it makes you wonder what becomes of Harden. Does Paul George leave in the offseason for better pastures? And as they jump into a new arena, it's a really big concern to have if you're the Los Angeles Clippers. All right, let's go to Denver Lakers. So Denver's the best team in the West. I think we know that. They dropped a game to the Lakers the other night, and the Lakers finally beat them for the first time in 11 meetings. But Denver's the better team. They got the best player in the league. I feel like they're the best team in the West. Jokic, Murray, Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, Caldwell Pope. These guys are just too much. They turn it on whenever they want. They're one of the most fascinating teams I've watched in a number of years. LeBron James and AD, they can't contain these guys. They're not a match for them. I don't think many of the teams in the West are a match for them. I think that they get the Timberwolves next round. Should be a good series, especially with Anthony Edwards. But Denver just feels like the class of the West, and it just feels like they're the best team, and they're just destined to make the finals again. For the Lakers side, I'm sure they're going to take this series loss the wrong way when it is eventually over. And who knows if LeBron lobbies for some moves to be made. I think they're missing something. They're missing a key playmaker on the perimeter in addition to LeBron. But, I find it hard to believe that they could get that without giving up Anthony Davis. And I don't think the Lakers will want to give up Anthony Davis. So they got to operate around the fringes as usual. And as LeBron gets older, you start to wonder, when do they start thinking about the process of moving on, right? And we shall see what happens in the offseason. And lastly, we got the Timberwolves and the Suns. The Timberwolves, a young, exciting team. Anthony Edwards is a star. They're up 3-0 at the time of this recording. They're going to advance to the next round. Great defense, exciting young players. This is a team that's going to be really good for a really long time. They're not the story for the series to me. To me, it's just the Phoenix Suns and what an unmitigated disaster this season has become. You trade for Bradley Beal. You don't have a draft pick until 2030. You're in win now mode, and you're not winning a game in the first round. That's bad. And they have a new owner, Matt Ishbia. There's a little bit of new owner syndrome going on with him, where he's going to try and bring in these top talents because aggressive, F it, go in, whatever. It hasn't worked. They don't have a point guard, and you need somebody. And it kind of speaks to this big three super team era. When you look at the Clippers and the Suns, your two teams, hasn't really worked, right? And I don't know if this means Durant's on the trading block. I don't know if they try to move on from Booker. They try to trade Beal or whatever the case may be, but they're not in a good spot right now. And they need to do something. And they have some interesting role players with Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal, whoever you want to throw out there. But the Suns are in a really bad place. They have no flexibility. They're a win now team that isn't winning. And that's a problem whenever you have that going on in the league. So that's kind of a synopsis of some quick shot thoughts of the playoffs. This week in the interview portion, I'm joined by a guest who was on here for the first episode, and that's Nick Andre. Nick and I kind of go through these series, most of them anyway. We don't really touch on the Cleveland, Orlando, and Oklahoma City, New Orleans series that much, but we kind of go over big picture stuff for all these teams involved, what we could be looking at, and who's really stood out to us and who has really disappointed us in the playoffs so far. It's a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. So come back right after the break, and we'll be talking to Nick Andre from For the Love of the Game podcast, the Believe in Florida State podcast, and a bunch of other great outlets and publications. So we'll be seeing you guys right after the break. All right, joining me now on the Deep Cover podcast is my first repeat guest. You remember him. He was on the first episode of the podcast that we did about Caitlin Clark. Nick Andre from a bunch of different outlets. Mr. Florida State, as I call him, because he's done a lot of stuff covering FSU right now. What's going on, Nick?
Man, thank you, Omar, for having me on again, man. The first episode that we do is really dope, man. I was happy to be the first guest, so now that you called me to come back, to talk hoops again, I'm very appreciative, man. So I'm excited to dive into some topics.
Yeah, man. Happy to have you on, of course. And, right now it's one of the best times of the year for me, right? It's NBA playoffs. There's a lot of stuff going on. And the crazy thing about the first round, which is what we're in right now, is you get a lot of matchups for like the current teams that are in their window and maybe get a peek at some teams that might be coming up over the next few years. So there's a lot of interesting series going on. And that's why I wanted to have Nick on here to kind of break down some bigger picture stuff for all of these series. But let's just jump in, man. Let's go start right in the East with Boston and Miami. I'll be honest with you, Nick. When this series got announced and Jimmy Butler got injured in the playing game, I was like, yeah, Boston's sweeping this team. That was kind of my takeaway immediately. First game happens. And I was further, convinced of that. It's just Boston was just making threes at a crazy rate. Game 2 happens. Miami starts making threes at a crazy rate. And then game 3 yesterday, we're recording this on Sunday, April 28th. So game 3 yesterday, Miami falters again, and Boston hits a bunch of shots, and now Boston's up 2-1. So I guess, first of all, were you surprised that the Heat were able to take a game? And second is, Boston right now, are they in championship or bust mode for this current group?
So I'm not surprised that Miami took a game, but I am surprised that they took one of Boston. I'm definitely surprised that they were able to get one of Boston. Even before the series went down, I told people I have Boston winning in 6, and I know that Jimmy Butler's out. I know that Terry Rozier is not going to be able to play, and people were calling me crazy. They were saying, no, without Jimmy, there's no way. But people have to remember who was on that sideline for Miami. Eric Spoelstra, one of the best coaches, if not the best coach in basketball. So, and you mentioned it, game 1, the Boston had a really good shooting game. I remember Sam Hauser was just going crazy himself. I think he knocked out like 4 or 5 threes in the first half. So getting that production from the supporting cast, was really big for Boston. But then you saw Miami be able to make those adjustments defensively. We saw great production from Bam. We saw great production from Tyler Hero, who had a strong game, from Hayward Highsmith, from other guys. Kevin Love also had a pretty good showing in game 2. And, that was really the biggest X factor. There was Spo making those adjustments that was necessary, and they were able to still win in Boston. And as far as for Boston, I'll say this. I feel like this is probably the best year that they can have as far as winning a championship this year. And I know that the East is very competitive, because we have a lot of great teams in the Eastern Conference, but I feel like right now there's nobody ahead of Boston, and I think they have to understand that. My issue with Boston is that even though they are very talented, they also have moments where they are very undisciplined. And I think we've seen that in a lot of years in recent past, when they got to the finals in 2022 and even all the conference finals that we saw them in, including last year when they played Miami and they went down 3-0. So that's the biggest thing is how can they stay locked in throughout the entire postseason? And I think that's one thing that we have to see from them. We already know they have the talent and they have the veteran leadership. I think acquiring Drew Holiday was really huge for them this past year. And, obviously him with being a champion back in Milwaukee, him being a great floor general, him being a great perimeter defender, I thought that was really huge for them. So I think the Celtics have all the tools to win a championship. And on top of that, Jason Tatum's only 26, Jaylen Brown's 27. So many people could say that, hey, they're just not entering the prime of their career. And then you look at all the experience that they do have. Like I said, having like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have not missed the playoffs yet in their careers, and they've been to like 4, 5, 6 conference finals, however many you want to say. So I think they have all the tools to win the championship this year. That's why I say that it's championship or bust. And I get it, even though Tatum and Brown are still young and they still have a lot of years ahead of them, but when you look at everything that they've been through, like I feel like this has to be the year that they win. I know it's not going to be easy because like I said, I know that the East is tough, and even if they do get to the finals and they have to face the defending champion Denver Nuggets, that's not going to be an easy task at all. But I feel like this year is the year where Boston has to win it, if you ask me.
Yeah, the path right now to get back to the finals is there. You're facing Miami with no Jimmy and no Rozier. Next round, you're awaiting either the Bucks or Pacers, the Cavs or the Magic. And like the Cavs are, they're up and down. They're starting to look shaky as that series has been evened up coming back to Cleveland. And Orlando's super young, and they rely so much on Banchero. And then the conference finals, you have this Bucks Pacers series, and Bucks are hobbled. Dame's about to miss a game, and you can see the Pacers upsetting them. This Knicks Sixers series with a bunch of injuries on both sides. No Julius Randle for the Knicks, no Mitchell Robinson now for the Knicks. Joel Embiid obviously clearly hobbled for the Sixers, and you see the path for this team that's remained healthy right throughout the entire season. Won a bunch of games, is shooting. Relies a lot on the shot, right, but they got guys who can make them. It's the reason they brought in Kristaps Porzingis, right? So I think for me, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a pretty big Celtics fan, and she was, she's getting all frustrated after they lost to the Heat that one game. And I was just like, look, should still be the favorite. And she just has this Heat paranoia, because they've done it to them so many times, but I really think that we're looking at a team that's in their championship window right now, and if they don't get back there, it's a massive disappointment. But let's play kind of an exercise. Let's say they lose in the conference final, or they get to the finals and they are embarrassed by Denver or whoever comes out of the West. Do you think that a big reshuffling is in order? Obviously, they just re-signed Holiday to an extension. So, do you think that they make some big changes if they either don't get there or get there and lose in the finals this year?
That's honestly a tough question because it's like I said, Jason Tatum's still 26. He just turned 26 years old. Jaylen Brown's still 27. So it's not like these guys are on the back end of their career. Like, many people, like I said before, many people could say that, like your prime really starts around like your mid to like 20. So a lot of people could say that they are just now entering their prime. So do you want to stick with that, moving forward, or do you want to possibly, break it up and start something fresh? So it's really tough, but I'll say this. I think one person that may be on the dock as far as leaving is probably Joe Mazzulla, and it sucks because I do think that he is a really good coach, and I think he's really proven himself, especially because a lot of people got to realize, last year he was kind of put on the spot, especially with the whole Ime Udoka situation that happened, late August, early September. So he basically had to figure things out within like a 2-3 week span right before training camp to try to figure out, okay, cool, where can I take this team? And for him to be able to lead them to a good record and get them to the conference finals last year was really big. And now you head into this year with a full year, and they pretty much like sweep through the NBA as being by far the best team in the league. So, that's one thing that I'll say is that I do believe that Joe Mazzulla is a coach, but this is a Celtic team where like the expectation is championship. They have the right team and they have the right pieces to win an NBA championship. So if they can't make it happen soon, then I could definitely see Joe Mazzulla going. But as far as roster construction, it's kind of tough to say just because of your duo guys. But I will say this: I wouldn't be surprised if anything happens for Boston this offseason if they don't win a championship.
Yeah, it's they're in this like this firm thing where they really want to maximize on Brown and Tatum, and I just feel like they'll probably do work around the edges. I can't see them really shopping Tatum or shopping Brown for that matter because Brown just got the extension.
Right,
But if you like, if the worst possible scenario happens and you somehow lose to the Heat in this series, there's a lot of questions. I think that the coach is always going to be the first one to go in the NBA. I mean, we all know that, unless a
right.
player requests a trade. But, I think Mazzulla, they might look at as like, hey, he's not ready to be a championship level coach. We got to bring somebody who is. And I'm not sure who that person becomes. Maybe they try to lure Ty Lue out of Clipperland, but, we'll see what happens there. I want to go to another series in the East here, which is the Bucks Pacers, which to me was one of the more interesting series in the East to when the bracket kind of got finalized, because the Pacers have played well against the Bucks this year, and the Bucks have been weird to say the least. Right, this has been a
Very.
really weird season. And no Giannis so far, and Dame Lillard's going to miss Game 4, so a lot of question marks around this team. And now they just lost that overtime game with that crazy Halliburton shot and all that. So, what do you make of the Bucks right now? Like this season's been kind of chaotic with, switching coaches, bringing in Doc Rivers. The Dame experiment hasn't fully worked. Middleton's been in and out of the lineup. Giannis now hurt during the playoffs. What do you make of this Bucks team right now?
Yeah, this has been one of the strangest seasons I've ever seen from like any championship contender, to say the least. I mean, when you look at the pieces on paper, you would think that yeah, like this team could definitely compete for an NBA championship. Which so, I mean, Giannis, two-time MVP, NBA champion. Same thing with Chris Middleton, NBA champion. Then you acquire Dame Lillard, who is one of the more premier scorers in basketball, one of the clutch players in the NBA today. So when you look at this roster constructed, you think, okay, yeah, this is a team that can really compete for a title, but the pieces just have not seemed to work all year. And even with them getting rid of Adrian Griffin and acquiring Doc Rivers, I mean, it just didn't seem like that worked as well. And now, even coming into the series, I mean, even with Giannis being out, obviously people are going with Milwaukee. And even for me, I went with Milwaukee too, just because, hey, I mean, they got the experience. Indiana, even though they did play well against Milwaukee, especially during the in-season tournament and even during like certain points during the regular season, I still feel like the experience definitely was going to play a big role in this series, and that's where Milwaukee had the edge in that scenario. But I'll be honest, man. I think Milwaukee allowing Indiana to steal Game 2, and they won Game 2 by 17 points. I think that gave the Pacers all the momentum. And Game 3 was close. I'll give credit to Milwaukee. Game 3 was really close. Give credit to Chris Middleton, who had a really strong performance in that matchup. Obviously, Halliburton ended up hitting like the game-winning floater, and then ended up hitting the clutch free throw. But I'll be right now with Dame not here, not going to be able to play in Game 4. With Giannis not playing at all in this series, I think I want to say, I think everything has to go on Indiana's side. I mean, obviously they're the more healthy team. I think they're the more confident team right now. So if you ask me, I think Game 4 is going to go to Indiana. I mean, it's like I say, and I think winning Game 2 on the road gave them so much momentum, and they played pretty well in Game 3. I mean, they had certain stretches where they weren't as locked in defensively the way that they needed to be, but I think now in Game 4, especially with them not having, especially with Milwaukee not having Dame, I think Indiana has to be the favorite right now.
Yeah, it's like what's the worst thing that could happen with this season, and we've seen it happen, right? You bring in this coach and it doesn't work, whatever for whatever reason, and then you bring in Doc Rivers and you bring in Dame Lillard. You're doing all this stuff, and not like you said on paper, this should be a championship contending team. This should have been the 2 seed in the East that would be meeting Boston in the conference final. But instead, the Dame pairing just hasn't really worked. Feels like right,
Nah.
and the roster is increasingly getting old. With
Mm-hmm.
Portis and Lopez, Middleton, who can't seem to stay healthy for long stretches, and I just kind of wonder if they again are bounced in the first round. Do we see the Giannis trade rumor thing start popping up again? Is that something that you think might happen, or do they start to revisit the possibility of shipping out Dame because it just hasn't worked? I think when a championship favorite loses in the first round, like and they're down 2-1, they're not in a great spot right now, especially missing their two best players. I mean, do you think that we could see some real ripple effect if they lose this series over there in Milwaukee?
Yeah, I'll say this: if Milwaukee does end up losing the series, which would be the second straight year where they lost in the first round, I think anything's on the table at this point. Even Giannis in recent years, has expressed his frustrations with the front office as far as not as far as them not making the necessary moves to help them win a title again. So I wouldn't be surprised if anything's on the table. Giannis could possibly ask out in the summer. Who knows? Dame might do the same thing. But I mean, I agree. I mean, this whole Milwaukee situation just has not worked, and I think they know it. They may not want to admit it, but they know that it hasn't really worked out in their favor. Um, I'll be honest, I wasn't really a big fan of getting rid of Adrian Griffin, and this is my thing with that whole situation is that I feel like if you're Milwaukee, especially with Adrian, coming into the season, he had no experience as a head coach in the NBA, so he has zero experience. So now you're placing him in this position where he has zero head coaching experience, to say the least. And now you're expecting him to try to carry a team all the way to the championship. And I get it. We've seen it in recent years. Steve Kerr was able to do it with the Golden State Warriors. Nick Nurse did it with the Toronto Raptors. So I get it. We've definitely seen it before, but it's not always. I don't know. It's not always something that you should expect, in my opinion. So with that being said, and I get it. And I'll be real. I mean, they went 30-13 before he got dismissed as head coach. So I mean, they weren't. I'm not gonna say that they were the best team, but they weren't necessarily on the wrong note as well at the same time. So I think them getting rid of Adrian and acquiring Doc Rivers, and I get it. I know people get on Doc Rivers' resume and everything, especially on social media. But I mean, he is a champion, and he has consistently gotten teams to the playoffs. But I don't know. I just don't think his coaching style and his system necessarily works for the team. And I think we're seeing a lot of it, throughout like the last parts of the regular season and even in this playoffs. So I think this offseason, anything's on the table for Milwaukee. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the Stars asked out, if even Doc Rivers is on his way out as well. So I think, like if this ends up being a year where they lose in the second round for the second straight year, anything's possible.
Yeah, there's like a big cohesion issue there, which is ironic that they're playing this Pacers team, which seems to have nothing but cohesion, right? Halliburton really has that whole team dialed in, and a guy like that might have been considered a malcontent before, and Miles Turner has bought in, and Pascal Siakam has fit in seamlessly with this team, and he's a matchup nightmare for the Bucks right now, and it just seems like this Bucks team is kind of as a Dame Lillard fan, I was kind of hoping that they would do something because I always hated the narrative around Lillard. They're like, oh, he just took the money to stay in Portland, never competitive outside of that 1 year where they got to a conference final.
Right.
And it seems like it's the same story all over again, where he's out in the first round, so well, that should be an interesting ripple effect for the rest of the league, especially if they decide to make some wholesale changes. Plus, the crazy thing about Milwaukee, they don't really have a guy of the future right now. And going into this draft, it's not necessarily a star draft; it's a role player draft, right? So, it's an interesting time for the Bucks. And if I was a Bucks fan, I'd be really nervous right now. It's the real danger of losing this series, and even if you get to the next round, you get to deal with the Bucks or the Knicks or the Sixers. So,
Right.
and have fun with that, right? So let's get into that Knicks Sixers series. I'll be honest, Nick, I have very little objectivity for this series as a Knicks fan.
I can understand it.
Yeah, but it's been as physical, as trash talky, as intense as anybody would have imagined. As we're recording right now, the game 4 is underway with the Knicks and the Sixers, so I'll be watching that right after we're done recording. But it's been back and forth. There's been controversy. There's the Embiid injury, the Bell's palsy stuff. Knicks fans and Knicks media calling Embiid a dirty player after injuring Mitchell Robinson. But I kind of want to step back away from the series for a second and talk specifically about Joel Embiid. He's a MVP, of course, won it last year. Probably would have won the second MVP if he didn't have the knee injury this year. And he's the only MVP that has never made a conference final. And when you're in this league, you're measured on championships, or at the very least championship appearances, being able to carry your team in your prime. And when you look at the center position, one of the most talent-rich positions in the history of basketball, you go back to Bill Russell, Will Chamberlain, Kareem. Fast forward to Olajuwon, Ewing, David Robinson, Shaq. These are all guys. Now Jokic today. These are
Yeah.
all guys that got the job done by at least getting to a final, right? And it really puts him in the frame of somebody like Bob McAdoo, who didn't really get there until he was past his prime as a role player. And if you're looking at Embiid right now, he's hurt. So if he gets past this series with the Knicks, great. But how much longer can he go on this surgically repaired knee until he is inevitably, bounced again? Is the real question, right? So how does the whole inability to carry a team in your prime to a conference final, how does this hurt the way we view Embiid from like a historical sense of basketball?
I mean, it's very important. I mean, you mentioned all the greats that we've seen in our time winning championships. Bill Russell got 11. Will was able to lead his team to multiple titles. Shaq was able to do the same thing. Kareem, and even Hakeem in the mid '90s. So the list goes on and on about the rich centers who were able. Oh yeah, even Nikola Jokic today. So I mean, like the list is long as far as like a lot of the great centers who were able to lead their teams to titles. And I know that over the last recent decades, it's been more of like a guard league where we've seen a lot of like wings being able to lead their team to titles. But I think Nikola Jokic kind of changed that narrative now to where, hey, you could be a big man and still lead your team to a title. So I think it's very important. And I mean, I think that's the one knock on Embiid's career is the lack of getting to the conference finals or even the NBA finals. And I mean, I've been on record saying that I feel like in today's NBA, as gifted and talented as Nikola Jokic is, I feel like Joel Embiid is the best offensive big. Like, this guy is literally 7 foot and he can literally play like a guard. He can play inside and out. He can play with his back to the basket. He can face up. He can knock down 3-point shots. He can score off the dribble. He can do so many things on an offensive end for a 7-footer that I don't think we've really ever seen before. I mean, even as great as Hakeem was offensively, I don't know if he had that same type of skill set that Embiid has, but that's his knock. And Joel Embiid has had many opportunities to do it. Date back to, in the early days. He had Ben Simmons. And then, later on, he ended up getting Jimmy Butler, and we saw what happened with Jimmy after he left Philly, got to Miami to 2 finals in the span of like 3 to 4 years. And even recent years, he had James Harden as well, and now he has Tyrese Maxey. So, it was never the fact that Joel Embiid never had a right team around him. I mean, you can probably say coaching because, I mean, he did have Brett Brown in the beginning, and then after that had Doc Rivers for a few years. So many people can allude that to coaching, and now he has Nick Nurse, a player who has gotten his team to an NBA championship and has gotten Toronto to multiple playoff appearances as well. So, but I think it's also got to be a little bit on Embiid as well. You look back at last year, Game 7. People forget Philly was up 3-2 last year on Boston after Game 5. Lose Game 6. Jason Tatum, who struggled throughout most of that Game 6, ended up going crazy in the fourth quarter. I can't remember exactly how many points he had, but he was really the big X factor in that final period to help Boston win. And then boom, he drops 51 in Game 7. And you look at Embiid. Embiid shot, I want to say, 4 for 15 in that game. I want to say so. Like there's been plenty of opportunities to where Embiid could have rose to the occasion in pivotal playoff moments, but he just was never able to get the job done. So you can blame it on everything that surrounds him, but you also got to point the finger at Embiid as well. So that's gotta be the biggest change for him. And also as far as for this year, I'll be honest. I mean, I don't know how other people feel, but I personally don't have Philadelphia getting out of this series. I think that New York is a better team. Give credit to Embiid. He dropped 50 in Game 3. I think that him and Maxey have been an ultimate duo throughout the season and this series. But when I look at New York, I think New York just has the better overall team. And I think, even though they don't have Julius Randle and now they're without Mitch, I think that their supporting cast has been a lot better. Like you look at it, like Jalen Brunson did not play well through the first 2 games. Like it was not great for him. But you still got good supporting cast from Deuce McBride, who came off the bench and gave great minutes. Josh Hart, who had great minutes as well, and who was able to provide both scoring and rebounding. You look at guys like Bogdanovich and other guys, who just were able to step up. So I think the biggest X factor to me in this series has been the supporting cast, and I think the New York's has been better. So, give credit to Philly. They got a big win in Game 3 to be able to keep their season alive. And I predicted that the series was going to go in 7.
Mm-hmm.
But if you ask me, I think that New York will be the better team in the series.
Yeah, it's the excuse of like the big excuse around Embiid not making has always been injury. Like, well,
Yeah.
he's dealing with this or he's dealing with that, which and obviously it's not a joke since he obviously missed 2 years due to injury, right? That at the beginning of his career. And But it reminds me, to use a football analogy, kind of like the way a lot of people treat Justin Herbert, the Chargers quarterback, which is, oh, he's so talented, he could be the best player in the league, blah blah blah, but for some reason can't get it done, right? You
Right,
has the pairing with Ben Simmons, then all-star Ben Simmons, right? Not the shell of the ghost of Ben Simmons that we know today.
right.
He then gets James Harden, and then it's easy to just say, well, playoff James Harden, what are you going to do? But at the end of the day, to me, you're the guy, right?
Right.
Like, you're the dude. You're the one. Like, if Hakeem faltered, right, and never made a final, they wouldn't be blaming Clyde Drexler. They'd be blaming Hakeem. He's the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing like with when Ewing faltered so much in New York over the years, before getting to the finals in '94. It was always, hey, yeah, he's good, but he's not that. They didn't really place the blame on John Starks or Charles Oakley. Those are part of the pieces, right? So you're the franchise, you're the guy, you're the one who has to be able to break through. We see it with Jimmy Butler. Chooses to be the guy, and he gets them to the finals. If they lose, they're not blaming Bam Adebayo; they're blaming Jimmy
Exactly.
Butler, right? And that's the weirdness of Embiid, I think, right? Where especially in a city that its stars get to finals. Even Iverson got to one, right?
Mm-hmm.
As Dr. J, Chamberlain, Barkley, all these guys have gotten to conference finals and finals, even if they didn't win it. And I think it's a big stain if he can't do it while he's still at the peak of his powers. And a while ago, I wrote an article about how the career of Patrick Ewing and the career of Joel Embiid have a lot of parallels. Both of these had these generational big men coming from big schools at the time in college basketball and get into Northeast cities that are really passionate about their teams, but also really critical of their star players. And then injuries have kind of derailed both. But here's the thing: Patrick Ewing got to two finals. Okay. He didn't win one, but he got to two finals. And he got to a couple conference finals as well when the '90s Bulls were kind of on their run. So to me, it's a big stain on Embiid as an all-time great big. And with the injury thing, like even Bill Walton was able to kind of figure that out before all his injuries started. So I do kind of wonder, about what his career has in store. He's 30 now, I believe, and he's not going to get any, the health stuff is not going to go away. It's a funny thing, it's only going to get worse. So, obviously we'll have to see what happens there. But I feel like there's no excuse, right? Like he gets off Harden, Maxey turns into a very capable number two. And, they bring in Buddy Hield for shooting. He hasn't even been used in this series. It's been kind of a flop.
Yeah.
So I just think ultimately you're measured by it, right? You're the star. The star is always measured by it. People didn't really bag on Amari and all his injuries when Carmelo was in New York. It was like, why can't Carmelo Anthony get it done, right?
Exactly.
And so maybe my assessment of a former Knick was not Patrick Ewing, but maybe he's really Carmelo Anthony. And it's just kind of like a very strange dynamic. Obviously, you want to see the great players have great moments, and I, at this moment, am unsure if Embiid will ever have that great conference final or finals moment, despite having so many chances. Let's go out west, though, Nick. So I think the most interesting series in the West so far has been Clippers Mavericks, and obviously a 4-5 is always kind of fascinating, usually, and you get a lot of star power here. You have Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Luka, Kyrie. And it's kind of weird because the first game, it's like, oh, are the Mavs in trouble? They get blown out of the gym the first game. But then the last two games, they've been able to really right the ship. And I kind of want to focus on the Mavs specifically first. They acquired PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford at the trade deadline. Dante Exum has been a fantastic signing for them coming off the bench. And you got guys like Josh Green, young guy, kind of coming up and developing. I feel like this is the best team they've surrounded Luka with. It has a lot of athleticism, a lot of defense, and a lot of shot making. Do you think that this Mavs team, if they could get past the Clippers, has a chance of getting to the conference finals?
I do. I do 100%. And I'll be real. I was on record saying even after the trade deadline, the Dallas Mavericks won. Like I feel like they acquired the right pieces to surround Luka and Kyrie with. You talk about PJ Washington from Charlotte. PJ is really a guy you can really maximize. You know, he's a guy that can play multiple positions. You know, he can step outside, play that small ball five. He can also play the four-man position. You know, he's great defensively. He can space the floor. He can knock down shots, you know, on the inside. Dale Gafford, who was really a defensive maestro, you know, during his years in Washington. I think people may have forgot, you know, those years when he played next to Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook, those years. And then, of course, when you talk about the rest of the guys, I mean, Dante Exum was a guy that really surprised me. You know, his shot making has been incredible. I mean, I think he's really stepped up tremendously. Derek Lively as a rookie, you know, what he's been able to provide, you know, as far as his rim protection and then, of course, his ability to dominate inside. So, you know, looking at it, and, you know, it's crazy because, I mean, Luka's played with a lot of great players, but this might be his best team that he's played with. You know, I know that he played with Porzingis at one point. I know that he played with Brunson at one point, but that was pretty much Brunson before he really elevated to becoming a superstar talent. But you know, you look at this Mavericks team. I think they have all the right tools to win the series, especially now that we just found out that Kawhi's going to be out for Game 4, and who knows if he's going to be out for the rest of the series or not. But now it's like, I mean, when you look at the situation, I think they have all the tools to be able to get it done. Luka's playing out of this world. Kyrie is also playing out of this world as well. Kyrie's actually been really spectacular, and I think that people have to really highlight how good he has been, because I know that Kyrie's been hated by the media for a long time now, but you know, he had a really good season this past season, or you know, throughout this season. They got him and Luka got the Mavs to 50 wins this year, which is the first time in a while, and they've been able to maximize off of that in the playoffs. So if you ask me, I think Dallas has to be the favorites to win the series, and I know that sounds crazy, especially when you look at the firepower that the Clippers have. You know, James Harden, Paul George, Kawhi when healthy, and then of course Russell Westbrook. But I think right now, when like looking at the overview of the series, yes, the Clippers were able to steal Game 1 and they dominated throughout the most part of Game 1. But you got to give credit to Dallas for just being able to make those adjustments. You know, being able to steal one on the Clippers' home floor in Game 2 and just being able to capitalize it off of Game 3. So right now, heading into Game 4, it's kind of almost like the situation right now with Indiana and Milwaukee, to where it's like, you know, Milwaukee got Game 1 and then Indiana was able to steal Game 2 on the road. And then going back home, they had all the momentum in the world. Then you see Dallas doing the same thing. So Game 4 is going to be really interesting. And I think if Dallas does come out on top in Game 4 and go up 3-1, that'll put the Clippers in a really crazy position. You know, try to get themselves back in the series.
You know, I look at what Kyrie's been able to do, and you know, when you look at the overarching kind of story of his career, it's kind of interesting. You know, number one overall pick, you know, in the post LeBron era, you know, for the Cavs, and LeBron comes back, and then he becomes, you know, this elite, one of the best number twos we've ever seen,
Right.
in one of the most iconic final shots we've ever seen. Then, you know, ego gets in the way. He ends up in Boston to be the guy. Doesn't work. Goes to Brooklyn to form the triumvirate with Kevin Durant and eventually James Harden. That doesn't work due to, you know, the COVID stuff and injury and all that stuff. And, you know, he forces his way out and he's into Dallas. And it's been like the perfect spot for him because, you know, he's always been good off ball. You know, he was great in that capacity as LeBron's running mate in Cleveland. But ironically, he's also one of the best ball handling guards we've ever seen. You know, so the dynamic there, and you know, when the trade happened, I was like, okay, Dallas has to do this because they need to show Luka they're serious, right? It's one of the issues they had during the Dirk era. They never brought in a proper number two, you know, to help him. And he
Exactly.
won a title, but it was a struggle, you know, because he never had a good number two. Now Luka has a great number two,
Right.
and Kyrie's been a model citizen. Nothing bad has come out in the press. Nothing, you know, no weird comments, you know, nothing like that. And it's been a fantastic fit. On the Clippers side, you know, you mentioned the similarities to the Bucks. I think another similarity that could be posed is to a team we're about to talk about in a little bit, which is the Phoenix Suns. You know, and this three-headed super team thing is, you know, really starting to go, you know, extinct, I think. You know, you look at the way the Clippers are struggling, the Suns on the verge of getting swept after a loss, again, another loss last night. And what happens is a guy like Kawhi gets hurt, you don't have the depth, you know, and you don't have the necessary guys. And, you know, you're relying so much on Westbrook coming up off the bench. PG has been up and down as always. Zubac has been pretty good, but guys like Coffee and Man, they miss shots and stuff like that. And the last game was really telling because Luka had a bad game, for him by his standards. 7 of 25, not great
Yeah.
efficiency for one of the most efficient scorers we have in the league. And, the Mavs still won comfortably, because they've been able to defend. They've been able to really limit what these guys can do. And, it seems like, it's a chaos situation for the Clippers, a team that looked like at one point that they might be the best team in the West for a short period. And so I guess from your perspective, what is going to become of this team if they are unable to really win this series? A lot of talk about Paul George maybe being on the way out. Obviously, Kawhi's there for the long term. Who knows with James Harden? He's the ultimate chaos agent, the ultimate wild card. So what do you make of the Clippers, if they have another first-round exit this year?
It's hard to really pinpoint what's next for the Clippers if they are to lose this series. I think it's kind of like what we talked about with Milwaukee. I think anything could be on the table. But I've been on record saying it might be time to just blow this whole team up. We talk about Paul George and Kawhi came together in 2019. They had these high expectations of being able to win a championship. People were even on record saying that they were better than the Lakers at the time because the Lakers had just acquired KD around that same time as well. So if you look at it, first year, both 3-1 lead in the bubble to the Nuggets. Second year, Kawhi went down with the MCL injury. They ended up they still got to the conference finals, but they ended up losing to Phoenix. Year 3 didn't even make it in. They lost in the play-in tournament to the New Orleans Pelicans. This past year, Kawhi got hurt again. PG didn't even play in the first round against Phoenix, and even now, we're kind of in the same predicament where Kawhi is now hurt. He ended up playing games 2 and 3, and now he's not going to be available for game 4. So, a lot of it had something to do, outside of the Clippers' control. At the end of the day, you can't control injuries. They just happen. And it's unfortunate that it happens to the same guys, but. And I get it, especially now with them moving to a new arena this upcoming season. And of course, now, they're getting a new uniform and everything, a new logo. So I get it, for marketing reasons. And of course, for brand reasons, you want to keep these guys around just because, you want to be able to fill out the season. You want to be able to show that the Clippers are really a team to come out and watch for. But I don't know. It's like, I think at this point, now they're in year 5 and it's like no finals appearance at all. I mean, we could talk about Joel Embiid and, with him, his lack of getting to the conference finals and NBA finals. But you look at this team assembled with the Clippers. Paul George went to multiple conference finals with the Pacers. Kawhi Leonard's the 2-time champion. James Harden was able to get to conference finals with the Houston Rockets. Same thing with Russell Westbrook. He got to the NBA finals in 2012 with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So these guys know how to win. And I know that a lot of these guys have passed the prime of their careers, but they know how to win. And I just feel like we just haven't really seen the best of it. And even throughout the season, I was looking at the Clippers. I was like, man, this is a really good team. But there's always that concern about what will come around in the postseason, unless this team is healthy. So now that this team is not healthy and we're seeing the way that Dallas is playing right now, I think it shouldn't be a surprise that Dallas may come out on top of the series. But if it does come true that the Clippers end up losing in this first round, it's kind of hard to pinpoint, what's next for this team. But if it were me, I would personally just start fresh, rebuild this whole roster, then just start from there.
It's tough because the stadium thing is a difficult thing, right? Because you're rebranding this team, you're really trying to separate yourself from the Lakers. And, it's another thing I wrote about a while ago when the logo stuff happened is like they're trying to distance themselves as far away from the Lakers as they possibly can because they've always been in the shadow. It's the same thing that Brooklyn deals with the Knicks, right? Where you have this giant brand in the same city. You want to be able to differentiate yourself. If they go into a new arena with no superstars, that's tough. That's difficult, and that's why I think they'll probably try to maintain Harden and George there because at least as much as they can because they got to try and sell some season tickets to these games, right?
Exactly.
And so I kind of wonder if that's the motivation for Ballmer because he's into it. He's into basketball. His arena, I commend him. He's designed it with the basketball fan in mind.
Right.
And that's something that a lot of owners don't do when they're designing new arenas. People made fun of the whole wall thing, almost like a student section in college. But like my thing is, it's a great idea to try to drum up, dedicated fans for this team, especially if the price is going to be a little lower. So I look at them and I think that they're in such a tough spot because if they lose, it's another failure, and then they're going into this new arena with nobody to really promote it. So it should be interesting to see. I do think the Mavs come out in this series, and I think they can um, get past OKC the next round, just because OKC is so young, and have a meet up with potentially the Nuggets or the Wolves in the conference finals. Speaking of the Wolves, let's get into their series with the Phoenix Suns. I want to focus on the Suns. The Wolves, everything is great in Minnesota. Anthony Edwards is a star. Gobert's been great. Cat's been doing well. Jaden McDaniels has been a revelation. Nothing really to talk about there. They're a young team on the rise. The
Right.
Suns, however, is another team. Went all in. They don't have draft picks until 2030, Nick. And they're about to get swept in the first round with Kevin Durant still performing at a high level, with prime Devin Booker, and with Bradley Beal, who they acquired from Washington in trade. How much of a disaster has this season been for Phoenix?
Been bad, been very bad. But I'll be honest. Like even last year when the Suns ended up acquiring Bradley Beal in the offseason, I saw people they were really excited. To me, it just wasn't really a move that I was really a fan of. And it's not a knock to Bradley Beal. I still believe that Bradley Beal is a really great player. But as far as big threes in the NBA, I feel like we're out of that era. And I feel like
Yeah,
we're more in an era where you could
a
probably have
big
two.
two.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. You could probably have like two superstars. You could probably have one superstar and one all-star, and then you have a great surrounding cast, like a great supporting cast. Like you look at Denver. Nikola Jokic is a superstar. Jamal Murray, he hasn't made an all-star. He
a
hasn't made an
star.
all-star game yet, but yeah, he is a star by any means. He's shown it throughout time and time again in the playoffs. I mean, we even saw it in Game 2 when he hit the game winner over Anthony Davis. But then you have other great players surrounding them. Like even last year, they had KCP. They had guys like Jeff Green. They had Christian Brown. And this is a great supporting cast surrounding them that was able to help them get through the West and even get to the finals, win the championship. And not saying that the Suns don't have a great supporting cast, because I think Grayson Allen's had a pretty good year. Eric Gordon as that veteran, being able to knock down shots offensively, I think that's really been huge. Even with guys like Royce O'Neal and others, I think that their supporting cast has been good, but when you look at the Suns team, and I've even expressed this as well, like there's no playmaker on this team. There's really nobody on the team that can really initiate the offense, and we're seeing that. On offense is more of give Booker the ball, give KD the ball, give Bradley Beal the ball, allow them to create, and possibly they could possibly make a pass, if they do draw a double team, but there's lack of ball movement, there's lack of execution on the offensive end, and they're pretty much just relying on the three stars to be able to lead the way. And I get it, because I mean all three of those guys are phenomenal all around scorers, but to me that's just not the formula that's just not the formula to me that can help you win a title. And even defensively, I feel like defensively, they just don't communicate well on the end of the floor as well. They don't communicate well on the switches. They don't really, be in sync when it comes to when it comes to defense. And I think that's also played a crucial role as well. So for them to be down 3-0, now I'll be honest, I had Minnesota winning in 6 initially,
Mm-hmm.
but for them to be down 3-0 is definitely surprising. But I'm also not surprised at the same time. But I just think with the Suns team, I don't know what's next for them. Surprisingly, I actually do have them winning Game 4 just because I feel like Minnesota is still a young team. I think that they're going to have some troubles trying to close out the series. So I think somehow, some way, Phoenix can find a way to get Game 4. But once the series goes back to Minnesota for Game 5, I have Minnesota dominating that one. And give credit to Minnesota; they've been phenomenal. I mean, you talked about Ant-Man is a rising superstar that we have in our league, and for those who are not caught up now, I mean, I hope that people are watching this series and really seeing how great he is. And Ant-Man has been good throughout the playoffs throughout his entire career. Honestly, I mean, you look back a couple of years ago when he played Memphis in the first round. I know that they ended up losing, but he had a really good series in that matchup. Even last year against Minnesota, they lost, against Denver, they lost in 5, and even he played well in that series as well. So for Ant-Man to be in this position now, to be able to lead Minnesota to one of the top teams in the West and see how well they're dominating against a lot of great players on the opposing team is just really exciting to see. So you got to give credit to Minnesota. But as far as for Phoenix, I don't know what's next for them after this. Obviously, they can go and get a playmaker, but I just feel like this whole big three thing with Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal, it just hasn't really worked in their favor.
I hate to sound so hot takey like this, but when you see Anthony Edwards play, it's like, is this what it was like when Jordan entered the league? and the bravado, the athleticism, the shot making, the defense. He's defensively been pretty good.
Yes,
Um, and I'm just like, man, and I think eventually Cat's gonna have to go, and they're gonna have to get like a secondary type player to be with him instead of Cat. And I think they'd prioritize Gobert over Cat just from the defensive rim protection perspective.
I
But
agree.
this has felt like a passing of the guard, a passing of the torch series from somebody like Kevin Durant to somebody like Anthony Edwards. I think the other day, if I had said that it feels like in a few years this league is going to be Victor Wembanyama's and Anthony Edwards' league. Those are going to be the two guys. And as Jokic gets a little older, Embiid gets older, Giannis gets older, these guys are going to be entering their primes, and the league is theirs. They're just so fascinating. And but with Phoenix, this feels to be a little bit like justice because I was so mad when they made the trade and did all their moves around it. This team did not have a point guard. And I know it's a positionless league. I don't care about that. You need somebody who has some sort of lead guard characteristics available at your disposal. You look throughout the rest of the league, throughout the playoffs, everyone has one. Phoenix does not. And you got to have that. You're trying to turn Devin Booker into a point guard. That's not who he is. It's never going to be who he is. And I think they are kind of facing the backlash of all that now. And you got to wonder where they go from here, like you said, because Booker's on the books, Durant's on the books, Beal's still on the books. And I think he still has that veto clause in his contract for trading, for trade exception stuff. And you got to wonder where they go from here because they got no future. And if this team doesn't figure it out, they're going to be stuck here. And you got this new owner who wants to make moves, and the moves haven't really panned out, and that's like the biggest issue. But let's go to a team that is probably on track to win the whole thing, to be quite honest. And that's the Denver Nuggets. Fascinating. They did just lose Game 4 to the Lakers, so it's a 3-1 series right now as we record. But it's fascinating that they were up 3-0 after having double-digit deficits in every single game. And it just shows you one, they're just like whatever. We're the Denver Nuggets. We'll turn it on. Which is a little dangerous, but when you got the best player in the world, you can kind of get away with that. So to you, am I overstating this? Are they not the clear favorites to win the title? Because to me, it seems like it's the Nuggets and then there's everybody else.
Yeah, right. I mean, my prediction is going to be Boston and Denver in the finals. But
Mm-hmm.
as far, as far as them being a favorite, you got to think. They won the title last year, and I know that the West is really good. Give credit to teams like the Oklahoma City Thunder for clinching the first seed, and even Minnesota for even continuing to be consistently one of the top teams in the West throughout the season. But this Denver team is just too good. They already have the experience. And I think they're really just capitalizing off of what they did last year, being able to get to the finals and, give credit. Because they even though the series is 3-1, they've been battle tested. The Lakers were up 20 in game 2, even up 15 at halftime. And they just found a way to just slowly crawl back into that game. We saw how good Jokic was, being able to score inside, score outside, being able to play off his teammates. And then, of course, Jamal Murray as well. But they just have such a great overall team. And I think, I'll be honest, one guy that I want to give credit to on this team, because I don't know if he's really getting a lot of credit, is Aaron Gordon. He's made sacrifices, but it's been great sacrifices to be able to help out the team. And his ability to play in that dunker spot so perfectly is just so amazing, because he's anticipating those lob passes from Jokic, because it's always that same play where Jamal Murray and Jokic will play in that pick and roll. Murray will kick it to Jokic, as he's rolling down the middle. One of the Lakers defenders will step up. One of the Lakers rim protectors will step up, and then boom, there's Aaron Gordon right in that dunk spot immediately. So Jokic is able to just throw that lob pass perfectly to Aaron Gordon, and he's just able to finish it. So that's a play that the Lakers just cannot stop, and they have not been able to stop it throughout the course of this series. But the Nuggets are just like, they're clearly showing us why they won the title last year. And I think as far as them possibly winning it again this year, I don't think it should be surprising to many.
Yeah, the Aaron Gordon piece is so important. I'll be honest, he's a guy I didn't really like in Orlando, and he's transformed his game, and he's really shown what he's really capable of as this kind of secondary piece behind Jokic and Murray, and it's impressive. Every time you watch them, it's just like they just are playing at a higher level than everybody else. It's just the intelligence, the shot making, the defense, everything is there, and even guys like Michael Porter Jr., who I'm not super fond of.
Yeah.
He's a big shot maker. He's Contavious Caldwell Pope, who's been fantastic. It's just Christian Brown. All the names go on and on and on of these guys on this team that have really built this championship DNA. And I find it hard to see really any team getting past them. That being said, they have a tough series coming up against the Timberwolves, and we should see, again, that's a champion against an up and comer, so that's really fascinating. So it should be really interesting to see. Before we get you out of here, Nick, kind of wanted to just get your thoughts on some, odds and ends here in the playoffs. We've talked about a lot of teams and players here. Has there been a particular player that's really surprised you so far in this first round?
I'll say this is a guy that I've loved throughout the first 4 games of the playoffs. And I know that we didn't touch on this series, but I'll go ahead and highlight him. Evan Mobley for the Cleveland Cavaliers has been really good. I think he's really stepped up this game throughout the course of the season, and I think he's been able to capitalize off of that in the playoffs. We see how active he is defensively as far as rim protection. Him being able to run the floor, him being able to play in the post on offense with his back to the basket on faces, being able to find a way to get to the basket. So Evan Mobley has been a crucial factor for the Cavs throughout this series. Is the reason why they ended up winning the first 2 games of the series. And if they're going to be able to move ahead and possibly get deep into the playoffs, he's going to have to continue to be one of the X factors for them. So that's probably the one guy that I'll say is Evan Mobley for the Cleveland Cavaliers.
See, for me, more so because of what this means long term for their future, it's been Jalen Williams for the Thunder.
Oh, that's a good one.
He's a star, man. He's going to be really good. Chet Holmgren is going to be really good. Mm-hmm. And I just look at it long term, like they have a lot of financial decisions to make over there because they're not going to be able to keep all these guys. And I just wonder what a team with Jalen Williams as their primary scoring option looks like, in a playoff series. And you hope that they will be able to keep him. I do wonder if they might prioritize keeping Chet over him, just because it gives you the big inside-out type game there with maybe following that Denver blueprint of having the initiating guard and then the big man who could also step out on the perimeter. So, but he's been incredibly impressive. Big reason why, obviously, the Oklahoma City series, New Orleans without Zion is a big blow, and they had a game that they could have stolen early and they didn't. And I think that's kind of when you kind of like, okay, well, this is going to be Oklahoma City series. But Jay Williams has been just incredibly, incredibly impressive. I guess on the flip side of that, who have you been most disappointed by, whether it's a team or a player?
It's a tough one. I think team. I'll probably say the Phoenix Suns. I didn't expect, like I said, I didn't expect them to go down 3-0. Even though I did have Minnesota winning the series, I felt like with Phoenix's experience and of course, with their star players, I feel like they could have made the series competitive. And like I said, I do have them winning game 4, but even if they do win game 4, I think Minnesota will close it out in game 5. But for them to be this bad, and I know that they've had their struggles throughout the season, but for them to be this bad in this series and to get blown out in game 3 in a game that they needed was just really disappointing. So I'll probably go with Phoenix.
Yeah, hard to disagree with you there, Nick. It's been a rough series, a rough playoff for them, and they got a lot of decisions coming up here. I guess you mentioned that the Nuggets and the Celtics are kind of your finals picks. Who do you got coming out in that, if that is indeed the finals?
I have to say Denver. I don't know if Boston has an answer for Nikola Jokic, honestly.
I don't think anyone has an answer for Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, because even though Boston's great, and we talked about it earlier in the show, this is kind of like championship or bust for them, and I do still have them coming out of the East. But if it is Denver that they are facing, I'll be right. I don't know how to get out of that series. I think especially with Denver being so experienced, with them already winning a championship, so they already know what it is, to be able to finish the job. there's a chance we could possibly see Denver repeating. I mean, which would be good for basketball because it just shows how dominant Jokic is and how he's able to lead that team as a whole.
Yeah, there's something to be said about as much as people love to talk about parity and even level playing field competition. At the end of the day, people tune in when there's an attraction, when there's like a dynasty level team. And
Right.
if Denver were to repeat, they become that,
Exactly.
and then everybody's kind of tracking them down. Uh, I guess last thing here throughout this episode, we've talked a lot about ramifications of losing a series and things that could be shaken up. Of all the teams in the playoffs right now, who do you think is primed for the biggest shakeup in the offseason after their run is done?
I would probably say I'll probably say the Milwaukee Bucks. I mean, we talked about it earlier. If they end up not getting out of this first round against Indiana, I would not be surprised if a lot of things happen. Coaching changes, roster adjustments. I think anything is on the table. Because, I mean, it's like I mentioned earlier. I mean, Giannis has put a lot of pressure on this front office to make moves happen in the past, and even before they were even this bad. So for them to be in this situation now and where they've struggled throughout most of the year, and if they possibly can't find a way to get out of this first round, a lot is going to go down this summer for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. Phoenix is another one. If they kind of, they go scorched earth with this new order after this series, especially if it's a sweep. I agree with
Mm-hmm.
you. I think they'll probably win game 4, but uh, I think the series is basically over. It is what
100%.
it is. And yeah, but those are the two teams because those are teams you were expecting to probably see at least in the second round. And if they don't
Right.
even make it out of that, then that becomes a big issue for both of those collective front offices that are in win now mode, and to not be able to win anything is a big blow. But Nick, you've been super generous with your time as always. Love our conversations. I know you're doing a lot of work right now. You just started up season 2 for the love of the game. You're doing all your Florida State stuff. So plug whatever it is you got to plug so that people know where to find all your great work.
Yes, sir. First and foremost, Omar, it's always a great conversation. With us talking about hoops, man. Thank you so much for having me on once again, man. And I'm always down to come on in the near future. All you gotta do is just hit me up, man. I'm always gonna be down. But as far as for me, follow myself on X at Nick Andre ATR. Make sure to follow for the love of the game as well. Just recently started the new season. New episodes out right now. And the new episode will be coming out throughout, or actually 2 episodes will be coming out this upcoming week. So please make sure to be in tune for that. I also host a podcast, How to Believe in Florida State Basketball. Please be in tune for that for any Florida State fans, for any updates for Florida State basketball, both men's and women's, as far as the offseason. And then, of course, me, I'm also starting to cover the Atlanta Dream for Team NBS Media. Shout out to them. So yeah, be on the lookout for content for them as well. So I'm pretty busy, man. So yeah, just follow me on X and you'll be able to see all the content, all the updates, as far as what I got going on.
Awesome. Yeah, all those links and where you can follow Nick will be in the description of the show notes of this one. Thank you as always, everybody, for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or directly on Substack at deepcover.substack.com. Thank you, Nick, again for joining me, and we'll be tuning in for the rest of the playoffs, and we'll see everybody next week.